First off, we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Christine Smith, Professor of Psychology and Gender and Women's Studies, right? You just said? Thank you. From the main campus at Green Bay. She's going to be giving us a talk on, I forgot the full title, your
sexism is showing about dress codes.
Thank you. All right, great.
Yeah,
Take it away.
Sure. So my high school didn't have, or junior high school didn't have a dress code. I mean, it was a while ago. And so I heard about this, but it wasn't really something that was on my really on my radar until I was chair of Women's and Gender Studies, and a woman contacted me. She lived in Ashwaubenon. She still lives in Ashwaubenon. And her daughter kept getting basically suspended from school, from junior high, middle school you call it here, for dress code violations. And she showed me a picture of her daughter. I wish I'd kept it. And I didn't get what was going on, and you know, she was outraged, and she wanted someone to be righteously outraged with her, and so I was. And so I started looking a little bit more into this, because I get called by the media sometimes for some of these kinds of issues, and so this seems to be a much bigger issue than I kind of anticipated, and so that's how I initially kind of got into this. Like I said, my high school didn't have them. My high school still doesn't have dress codes. I looked them up, and apparently they don't have a student handbook. That might have something to do with it. So they're either really progressive or really behind. It's really behind, as I guarantee you. You had a dress code. Did you all have dress codes too? And what's that?
I think so.
You're like, yeah. Well, and so that's the key, right? You might have, that was the same thing with me. I'm like, did we have one? And I can't really go back look it up, it was before the internet. But some schools might have a dress code and not really be aware of it. Others are hyper aware of it, like this mom who had contacted me about her own daughter, and the fact that her daughter was being repeatedly pulled out of class, and she was upset. And her daughter really wasn't wearing anything all that unusual. You know, she bought her clothes at Target, Walmart, things like that. And so she was upset because her daughter's education was being disrupted. So I brought up some local ones, some local dress codes, but I think it's even better to kind of look at your all dress codes. So we've got a few things that kind of are addressed here, right? That anything that will present a hazard to the health and safety of the student or others in the school. Trying to figure out what clothing, maybe if it was full of asbestos or something, would be a health hazard, but this is not uncommon. Interfere with school work, create disorder, disrupt the educational program, cause excessive wear or damage to school property. Prevent the student from achieving his or her own educational objective because blocked vision or restricted movement. Apparently if you have really high hair or something like that and someone can't see around you. To avoid misunderstandings, a test of reasonableness shall be applied when implementing this policy. A building administrator shall make the final determination what's reasonable. And so here are some more things that relate to health, safety, distractions. So alcohol, tobacco ads. Display of any obscene language or distracting advertising. Isn't advertising supposed to be distracting? Isn't that the whole point of it? Wearing items that support or glorify violence and dangerous behavior, including gang-related apparel. Ensure safety. Hats, hoods, large head coverings, capes, and coats. So I hope none of you are wearing your capes to school. Chains or other items. Shoes. You must wear shoes. And for all students, skirts and shorts. Length must be past fingertips, no visible midriff, no plunging and or see-through necklines, armholes, undergarments, and straps on shoulders must be at least 1 inch wide, no visible undergarments. there's the rationales at the beginning to promote a professional and respectful learning environment and readiness for the world of work. And this is often one of the justifications for dress codes, that students need to learn how to dress properly for example, to go out into a work environment. And so you see some of the same kind of things, no drug, alcohol, tobacco, profane or inappropriate language, derogatory dress. But you also get clothing must not be too short, too tight, and cover areas that are expected to be covered, with no undergarments to be exposed. It's a little vague. Right? Hats, hoodies, there we go, midriff and cleavage, or any other areas that exposes too much bare skin. So you see how incredibly subjective this is. So for one administrator, this may be a huge issue, another, because they have very different ideas about what should be covered. And then what happens if the student is seen in violation? They'll be asked to fix the violation, parents may be contacted, school students may be suspended. They will be provided with appropriate school clothing to wear. You probably don't ever want to wear that. Right? So this will, and so dress codes, this is middle school, and I'll put up the one for the high school, which actually has pictures in case you are confused, are pretty similar. They have a lot of similar kinds of elements. So I love this one, though, because it has visuals. And note that the first 4 or 5 are for girls. Shorts, boys and girls do wear shorts. Skirts must be 12 inches or longer. They have to be fingertip length. Tops need to have a neckline and 2-inch strap. Bra straps under the 2-inch strap, so I'm going to make sure I don't do a dress code violation here. Leggings. Leggings are a huge issue with dress codes. And here you can only wear leggings, so Sheboygan South, leggings are not to be worn as pants, even with a long shirt. So what is going to happen if a girl wears leggings? You're going to explode, clearly. And what's the difference between legging and the skinny jeans everyone wears now? Right? But guys, don't feel left out. No one wants to see your underwear. This goes for you two ladies. No wife beaters or cut-off shirts. Luckily, it's not 1987. You know, so who does that? So about half of the schools, public schools and private schools, can do what they want. Right? But about half of public schools and middle schools are actually even more likely to have dress codes. And the number has been increasing since the 2000s. So schools that may not have had dress codes in 2000 are increasingly likely to have those now, and they're part of student code of conduct. Now, dress codes aren't necessarily new. They've been around at least since the 1940s. I know that my mother went to a public school and she was required to wear dresses, for example. It wasn't until the 1960s that girls could wear dresses. And so these are not unusual, but interestingly, they sort of waned in the 70s and 80s, probably with the women's liberation movement, and in the 2000s became increasingly likely. Do any of you have any ideas why this might have become more like, let's go, the 2000s? Val.
Britney Spears.
Britney Spears. It's her fault.
Well, there was such an outcry to her videos, right? And there was this idea that there was really sexualization of girls' clothes. Because then you could find thongs for girls at age 7.
Yeah.
And people were freaking out about it.
Let me tell you about the awesome tube top I used to wear, and the pants where you had to lay on your bed and zip them up because otherwise you couldn't get those things out. The muffin top we originated, thank you. But I agree that sexualization is images like Britney Spears. Someone else had their hand up too. Were you going to say something?
I was actually going to, basically, I was going to directly blame Britney Spears here.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say probably because of the in the 2000s there was kind of at least from how I can perceive it as a progression of more I don't want to say promiscuous clothing, but rather a diminishment of fabric.
Highly sexualized images, we call in the profession. How about that?
And I think that ties on to like how she was talking about with, you find like certain underwear for people who are like 7 years old, and companies like Abercrombie and Fitch who progress these or push these ideals and things like that. I think is probably the biggest part of it.
And I think that's a good point, right? We have these images, we see the sort of current fashions have changed. And, I didn't have MTV. MTV actually was founded in 1981, which is the year I graduated from high school. So, and in the 80s, we were all about hair. So we covered up everything anyway. So, but you're both right. Britney Spears is sort of an example of the type of imagery we've increasingly seen, and girls model it. Well, why do girls model it? Because they learned that this is kind of what you kind of should be doing. So when we look at dress codes, there is increasing social concern about what young people are wearing. Interestingly, for girls, and these dress codes, even though they allegedly include both boys and girls, they are disproportionately likely to affect girls, and girls are overwhelmingly more likely to be called out on violating dress codes. When boys are violating dress codes, it's usually around. It's highly racialized, oftentimes, because you saw the message about gang signs. Well, so wearing red because you must be a member of the Crips, or having your pants pretty low so you can see your underwear, which is something you're more likely to see among black and brown kids, right? Or for boys, dressing in ways that are gender inappropriate. So dressing like girls, right? And allegedly this is because we have a certain kind of image, and because we're teaching our children how to get through the world and how to interact with the world, and that's part of what schooling does. So dress codes aren't inherently problematic, but when they're disproportionately likely to affect girls and pulling girls out of the classroom so their education is being interrupted is highly problematic. So these are two examples of girls who've had dress code violations. So left, what do you think her dress code violation is? Why she was removed from class?
Too much skin.
Too much skin? Sort of. There's certain parts of her skin that are allegedly problematic. Now, you can't really see cleavage, so you're like, it's her collarbone. She was removed from class because, I can't even personally see her collarbone, but I guess if she removed her hair. On the right, no, it's not collarbone.
Showing too much ankle.
I know, right? And no, when you look at women's fashion, right? It used to be that, flash ankle, she must be kind of slutty, right? So it has certainly changed, but nevertheless, it's all part of this idea that women's bodies are really highly sexualized. So if you're showing off an ankle or a collarbone, she doesn't have a bra on. And so she was made to put Band-Aids over her nipples by the school. Yeah, work through it with me. Let's.
Could you see the
Right. From here you can't, right?
Could you see the nipples in the photo?
Apparently not, although, she might have gotten cold at some point. And so apparently the shirt itself was not see-through, but they figured out, and it may be because there are no bra straps. So it wasn't a see-through top that you could tell that she had bras. They were able to see. Now think about this. Somebody had to be spending a lot of time looking at her to determine this. You know, okay, I don't see any bra straps there. And so maybe she's a little cold. Then, yeah, so she got pulled out of class for this. Yeah. Here's two recent examples. So on the left, a girl got pulled out of class for wearing that shirt, for being anti-racist and sexist and homophobic. And the girl on the right, this has been another big issue with black girls' hairstyles. So she wore a wrap on her head, and that was seen as distracting. Girls who've worn braids have also been pulled out of class. Up until recently, the military would not let black women wear braids in their hair.
I was in when they changed that. I remember when that happened, and it. You want to be quiet?
See?
So, and if I remember correctly, it's still not even. There's only a few braids that they're allowed to have.
Right.
But it actually has to do more with occupational hazards, I believe, and maintaining uniformity in the fact that having their covers fit on. It has more to do with that than oppressing a culture or something like that.
Well, one of the things, though, is that, and you're right, you're absolutely right with a couple of things, uniformity and also hazards, right? You don't want to have, for example, if you get caught in something. But black people have different kind of hair than white folks. And it hadn't taken into consideration that. And so the standards for uniformity just simply might be different in some ways. But you also see, and I think it's an important point, that, just as with clothing, we don't want anything that can potentially be problematic or dangerous. And so if those are our standards and we can enforce those uniformly, then that becomes, that may be a good reason to have specific standards. So, but when we look at, especially some of these dress codes, and you saw it with the Sheboygan dress code, that they, as I said, they disproportionately likely target girls. Or boys who might dare to have long hair, or one boy got dress coded for wearing makeup. So this increase, and the experience that my friend now, Cassandra's daughter, was having, was that they were told that girls cannot wear clothes that are too short, too tight, because they are distracting the boys. Have you gotten that? Yeah. Where do you go to school?
Urban Middle School.
Okay. So have you gotten dress coded?
No, but at the beginning, they told us a list of rules, and then they pulled each girl out of class to measure your bra size.
Wow. To measure your bra size. What does that have to do with your education?
I don't know. And I asked them, and they said, it's too distracting for the boys.
How did you get through high school and junior high? How'd you do it? You brave souls, right? With all these girls. I don't know how my college get through class. How they do it, right?
I'm still distracted from short bra.
Right, see, I know it.
Can't focus.
It happened. And yet you managed to work through it, right? And that's exactly the it. In junior high school, I was often distracted by the little boy who's got the cheesy, like you just started growing that mustache. You remember, it was really awkward. But I was like, I was distracted. We don't dress code boys for facial hair, right? But everything's distracting in junior high and high school, right? Especially people you might be interested in romantically. And that may be a time where you might want to learn how to be able to deal with this. But oftentimes the message is, don't distract the boys. Although interestingly, when we look at dress coding, it is primarily done by teachers, not boys. It's not boys going up and saying, I can't concentrate with her boobs existing. Right? They're not, it's often male and sometimes female teachers who have decided that you cannot function with this visual. And so girls often learn that your bodies are highly distracting. Cover that up. And note that it's covered up because we're worried about boys being distracted, not girls being pulled out of classrooms. So let's look at, I'm a psychologist by trade. I'm a social psychologist, a researcher, so I'm not a clinician, don't be afraid. And the American Psychological Association has actually looked at this pretty extensively, and they developed the APA task force on the sexualization of girls. And looking at this idea that girls are often highly sexualized, even at very young ages. Go look at clothing. And so this is often an issue with parents too. I may want my daughter to be more covered up. Where am I supposed to buy that? And then girls who are then also learning what it means to become women, just as boys are learning what it means to become men. And so we often see a high sexualization of girls' bodies. That one of the things we saw in the 2000s was an increasing sexualization of girls at younger ages. And so Britney Spears is a good example. I mean, so she was certainly presented as this teenager. Let's see what we got going on here. So just giving some examples. So boys, one day, I'll make history. Daddy says I can't date until I'm 30. Preschools having dress codes. Sit and act like a lady. I always like that one because it just means sit down, shut up, and keep your legs closed. Pretty much sums it up, right? Don't watch those. The idea of girls not being able to run around topless. Parents being reported for having pictures of small children on Facebook who are, often topless. And so we've become a more talking about dating my daughters, joke assuming ownership. And so what's happened is that girls' clothing has gotten more highly sexualized, and so we as a culture have placed more and more emphasis on girls' bodies, just as we do on adult women's bodies. And so this highly sexualized, things like, this is from the APA task force. A person's value comes from his or her sexual appeal or behavior to the exclusion of other characteristics. Or someone is sexually objectified, made into a thing for others' use. Or sexuality is inappropriately imposed upon a person. And this is exactly what you often get with these school dress codes. That girls' bodies, whether it's showing skin or the fact that they are developing secondary sex characteristics, are seen as things that need to be covered up because girls become defined by their bodies, and things that boys are inherently distracted by. I don't know how well you can see this, but this is literally today. This woman got dress coded at an airport. They were trying to kick her off the flight because of what she's wearing. And it's kind of hard to see, but she's got a short top here with kind of spaghetti straps, and you can see a little bit of her midriff here, and then she's got some kind of baggy pants. And she's 21 years old. And they tried to kick her off the flight because of what she was wearing. She was causing offense and was inappropriate. So women's bodies are highly sexualized and inappropriate. And we still continue to give girls the message that boys can't control themselves, which is pretty insulting to boys, and that girls, boys will be boys, and that girls are there to stop boys, not tempt them from, so do not provide temptation, you're inherently distracting, and boys can kind of do what they want. And oftentimes, if boys are kind of biologically, that's what they are, boys, they're going to be inherently distracted by girls, so girls should change and cover up for the boys. Well, if boys are not able to get through junior high school or high school, we don't think about boys, for example, and certainly this is a heterosexual context, but we don't think about boys being distracting to, for example, girls. Why aren't boys seen as sexually distracting to girls? Boys are often not defined by their appearance, and we don't see girls in the same ways we see boys. We often see girls as objects of desire, as someone who, when we teach them to be wanted, but we don't see girls as wanting. What Michelle Fine, who's a social psychologist like myself, calls the missing discourse of desire. We don't see girls as desiring. So the thought that a girl might be distracted by a boy's body or another girl's body, and a boy by a girl's body or another boy's body, we don't see girls as having desire, and so they're not distracted somehow, except apparently by a muscle shirt, which, again, that's why the fashion apparently went away in '87. Couldn't handle it. So it also goes into our beliefs about what we think boys do, that boys are kind of these walking hormones who can't control themselves. And so girls need to control themselves, and we don't see girls as desiring. So we don't worry about that, even though those cheesy little mustaches. And so if this is in a learning environment and girls are seen as not distracting the boys, whose experience is being prioritized? You shouldn't distract the boys, so we're going to pull you out of class, or we're going to suspend you so that you don't distract the boys. Well, what about you, who's being suspended, who's not in class? When I talk to my students about this, they all have all the girls have horror stories about things that happened. That they'd have clothing there for them to wear that was just like the gaudiest, most ugly thing you've ever seen. And so this is something that we remember. And what it leads to is self-objectification. So girls learn that they're being looked at. And so this isn't just dress codes. Dress codes are part of the larger cultural message that you should be sexy and sexual, as Brittany told us, that you are being looked at and you need to be aware of that. So what we call self-objectification theory is the idea that girls learn that they're being looked at. And so that they're being treated as objects of desire. And they internalize this and learn to then treat themselves that way. Because if you think other people are looking at you and checking you out, you may be hypervigilant. And if you're being dress coded, that means you're being reminded constantly that your body is the most important thing. And so girls often will develop a preoccupation of what they look like. And it often leads to body shame. Because remember, we also have these cultural images of what you're supposed to look like, which nobody actually looks like, because they're all airbrushed. I'm taking a Photoshop class. You can use it for good or for evil, right? I'm going to put wrinkles in people. So give them some extra experience, right? And so you learn that I'm being looked at, what my body is really important. Clearly everybody's distracted by it. So girls learn to be looked at and learn to be sort of hypervigilant about their bodies. One of my favorite studies in psychology. You are going to participate in a psychology study. And they had women and men. And so what we're going to have you do is we want to look at kind of consumer behavior and how people respond to different kinds of products. So we're going to have you either put on a swimsuit, so both women and men put on swimsuits, and they have a bunch of swimsuits there for put in, or we're going to have you put on a big bulky sweater. Okay? And so you put those on, they have a mock dressing room there, and so they tell you that you are going to stay in the dressing room for a bit. It takes us a while to kind of adapt to, to having this clothing product on. And so you're in a dressing room, which has a mirror, of course, and while you're in there, we're wondering if you can participate and do this other kind of task for us. And they have you do math. So we've got boys in bulky sweaters doing math, girls in bulky sweaters doing math, boys in swimsuits doing math, girls in swimsuits doing math. And what they do is they look at their math scores. And for boys, men, their scores didn't differ much. Now, swimsuits are not really things that make anyone feel good about themselves, quite honestly. And we're certainly finding an increase in boys' and men's body dissatisfaction, because that was the goal. Let's not get women to stop hating their bodies, let's get men to start hating theirs. And so, but because you don't sell products when people like themselves. But for the men, their math scores really didn't differ much depending on what they were wearing. For the girls, when they were wearing big bulky sweaters, they did about the same as the guys did in math. But when they were wearing, for the girls who were wearing swimsuits, swimsuits for women especially are incredibly often make them very body conscious. And so their scores actually went down when they were wearing swimsuits. The idea was that, you became super self-conscious, and we can't sort of multitask very well. We can't, when you're kind of being distracted and you're worrying what you look like, you can't do these other things well. So we find that self-objectification of girls and women actually consume what we call attentional resources or cognitive resources. When you're being constantly looked at, you worry about being constantly looked at, which means you can't concentrate on other kinds of things. So you focus on your bodies. So every time I put something on Facebook about dress codes, somebody in tons of people respond. So I just put something that I was doing this talk on dress codes, and this is what I just got like 2 days ago. I'm like, hey, can I use your stuff? My niece was a sophomore in high school. This is just recently. A male teacher pulled her aside for wearing a scoop neck blouse. He told her that she needed to cover up her gifts because they were distracting. Needless to say, we all made calls to the principal. They did nothing. 6 months later, the same teacher was arrested for having sexual relations with a student. I'm like, and then, she even, the girl, her niece, even mentioned that a couple boys confronted the teacher about how inappropriate he was being, and that they weren't being distracted by her shirt. Yeah, when my other students, in the 6th grade, I took off my sweatshirt at research because I was wearing a tank underneath. It was hot out, and she was flat. She's like, I was flat as an ironing board. On top of that, I got dress coded. Her last day of school in her senior year, she got called to the office because she put on leggings and her shorts. Her shorts were not quite finger length. Her male teacher at the time even told me it was ridiculous. Anyone paying that much attention to a kid was wearing shouldn't be teaching. A principal apologized, and a different teacher was making a stink. It was their last day of school. So these are sort of these constant little, what we often refer to as microaggressions in psychology, of having these kinds of experiences of making you super sensitive because you're wearing a tank or you're wearing a scoop neck. So the consequences of this are big. They're emotional, cognitive and emotional consequences. If we look at focus on appearance in girls, hyper-focus on appearance in girls is related to kind of the big 3: eating disorders, anxiety, and depression. We find much higher rates in girls and women. Mental and physical health, obviously we can see how that's related with eating disorders. Sexuality, this hyper-focus on sexuality often actually leads to sexual shame. Lower use of things like condoms and guilt about sex, and beliefs that what you look like is more important than who you are. So dress codes are kind of part of that larger element. They're not the only problem, but they reinforce what Britney Spears, and note that, you know, it's easy to blame Britney Spears. Britney Spears didn't put herself on a video, right? Someone had to decide that we're going to have this particular kind of image, we want to send this particular kind of message. And so girls don't get this idea out of nowhere. Boys don't get their ideas out of nowhere either. I'm a psychologist, don't ever say that to me, right? Okay, well, that's just the way it is. Oh no, not to a psychologist it's not. Things just don't happen accidentally. Everything has a reason. Right? And so we learn the messages in adolescence, especially we're learning how to be women and men and what's important. So what do you do? There's some great stuff going on now. I'm More Than a Distraction is actually it's a Facebook page where girls can talk about this. That, you know, this emphasis on their bodies. If you can't concentrate on your work, girls or boys, we need to teach you how to concentrate on your work. In Kenosha, although I've got a thing to say about this in a minute, the girls in the high school formed a women's empowerment club, and they took on the dress code. And, come on, won. So this is actually written by one of the students. And so they were getting dress coded, Indian Trail High School, which is in Kenosha. And so these are often school board messages. So they come from school boards. And so the dress code in our district unfairly targeted female students by banning clothing such as legging, yoga pants, and tank tops. Yoga pants too. Men actually can't concentrate if women have yoga pants on. Did you know that? It's an actual physical impossibility. So why do women and girls wear yoga pants and leggings? They're comfortable, right? And so it's interesting that something that women wear because they're comfortable are then highly sexualized. And so they were being kicked out of class and subjected to suggestive looks and comments from older adults. And so again, note that these are often adults who are enforcing these. We felt the eyes of 2,400 students as we get paraded around the building by faculty. Instead of focusing on our studies, we're sacrificing our comfort as our bodies adjust for distractions. And they consistently overlook the clothing decisions of male counterparts. Never saw a single male disciplined, even though they wore pajama pants and other fashions that violated the dress code. And so they went to school board meetings, and they just kept showing up at school board meetings, and they went to see how it would be. They wanted to do this in ways that they thought that they would be persuasive, and so they started attending school board meetings, shared their personal stories with school board members. So one time in 10th grade, she was kicked out of class for wearing leggings and a flannel shirt. An outfit she felt safe and comfortable in. She missed a full day of education because of that. And being distracted by male teachers, and they consistently went to school board meetings. And eventually, after 6 regular meetings and 2 working sessions, the board ruled in their favor. And they changed the dress code's bias against girls. Now, I don't know if you heard about what recently went on there with the cheerleading squad. Yeah, so it's the same school district. So there's clearly a problem. I guess for the cheerleaders, at the end of the year, they'd have a ceremony. You get your trophies and stuff. And they would bring up, so they got awards for like best butt, best boobs, things like that. Right, so they didn't do that for the football players. They should have. No, you know, I mean, right? And so think about this. There may be reasons for dress codes, right? Let's see if I get this one. So it doesn't mean that, you know, you may not want students who are having things that are, you know, maybe saying things that other people might find offensive or might be distracting because, you know, hats are often an issue because you might be hiding something under the rim like the test answers, right? And so people have actually come up with dress codes that are non-sexist. And so students must wear clothing, including both a shirt or pants or skirt, or the equivalent, and shoes. They must have fabric in the front and on the sides and under the arms. Clothing must cover undergarments. Fabric covering breasts, genitals, and buttocks must be opaque. You can't see through them. Hats must allow the face to be visible and not interfere with sight of any student or staff. Clothing must be suitable for scheduled classroom activities, including physical education, science labs, things like that. And you might have specialized clothing for certain kinds of courses. So we can do this in a way that actually doesn't target one group or another. And several school districts have adopted this. For example, Evanston, Illinois has. And so things are allowable, things are not allowable. So clothing depicting pornography, nudity, sexual acts. And grooming may affect health or safety. So it doesn't mean that we may not want students to learn specific kind of ways, because we are socializing people into the larger world. But girls and boys receive enough messages in the culture about how they're supposed to behave. And as school districts, ideally want to empower all students to do the best that they can. And so school districts might have specific requirements, and it doesn't have to target one group of people versus another. I often find this interesting. How do girls who like girls control themselves around all those tank tops and shorts? And I always wonder how my male students in college, how do they do it? Do you ever see what people come to class in? It was interesting, the first time I did a talk about dress codes there, and right before I was doing this talk, there was a Muslim student walking down the hall in leggings, a hijab, and a big shirt. And I'm like, you are violating a dress code of probably every school, high school, and yet she was dressed in modestly for her. Yeah.
I don't think a school can actually tell somebody they can't in that instance because it's religious.
Well, they can't take the hijab, but they could still violate with the leggings.
Oh.
Yeah, so the hijab, right. So, and that's an important point, right? So we might religious gear and things like that. So I just thought it was interesting. This one's protected, this one, unless it's longer than your fingertips. And this also becomes an issue for really tall students. Nothing's longer than your fingertips, right? And so, I like this message, but instead of body shaming women, school districts should teach 15 to 18-year-old boys to stop degrading women. But realistically, it seems 15 to 18-year-old boys seem to be less of a problem than many of the teachers. than adult males sexualizing the girls. And adult females, by the way, too, because my friend whose daughter was being dress coded consistently by male and female teachers. I go to a school where the length of my shorts is more important than my education. But college is weird. How are you allowed to show your shoulders and somehow male students just like, what happens? So this issue, you will see it in the media all the time. As I said, I was preparing to do this talk, and there's this picture of a woman who was about to get kicked off of a plane because of what she was wearing. So we have this highly sexualized culture that focuses on women's bodies. And then when women internalize that message that what I look like is important, then they're seen negatively for example, wearing fashion, wearing clothing. When you think about how fashion evolves and what fashion looks like, lots of these girls are just attempting to wear what are easily available to them. And often clothes can be, I mean, leggings do kind of, you can tell someone has underwear on or not when you're wearing leggings. So if someone's wearing leggings, we can look at that as, I can't distract, or she's really comfortable. So we need to examine our larger cultural messages about sexuality and girls' bodies and boys' ability to control themselves around girls. So we hypersexualize girls and women, blame them for doing it, and absolve men for their role in it. So don't do that. This is often the message in most of my classes at the end. Just stop it. So that's kind of where I'm going to end. Just stop doing that. All right. Questions or comments? And so the military, by the way, often is pretty good with things because they try to be really uniform.
Well, I was just going to say, what's interesting is typically the military is more progressive on most cultural issues,
Yeah, definitely.
as opposed to many other society, and not just in gender aspects, but with
race as well,
color and things like that.
Yeah.
They've been very much more progressive. But so, and even now, right as I was getting out, they, at least in the Navy, they started integrating uniforms to where it's the same uniform. There wasn't there was a distinction, at least for our dress blues, where women wore something
right,
more like a flight attendant outfit, an actual sailor outfit. But now they've actually integrated it and making it. They're working and integrating it so that it's uniform across the board, except for except for sizing and fitting to fit the female body.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a pretty exciting time, at least in that aspect. But
yeah, and you're right. When I talk in social psychology, I often concentrate on race, and we often find that when we're looking at progressive organizations around race, actually the military is often one they talk about. And race does come up, by the way, with school dress codes. For a while it was, they might be in a gang. Interesting, or they might wear, those really baggy pants. So my foster daughter, who's not, anyway, she's kind of my daughter now. Anyway, it's hard to explain her role in my life, as in I pay for everything. Often would wear baggy, she liked to wear she wore boys' pants, and her underwear would kind of show. So we made sure she had nice underwear, because that's important. And she never got dress coded, which I thought was interesting, because she often did show, but with her hair, that became more of an issue. Because then she got dreads, and people want to touch it, and it's bad, and it's often seen as distracting. So things like highly racialized images, and because boys and girls who are more likely to wear baggy pants are disproportionately likely to be kids of color. And so that becomes an issue as well. But that sort of has kind of waxed and waned, has become less of an issue when we focus more on leggings and yoga pants. Any other comments about dress codes? I'm very proud, as I said, that my high school has never apparently had dress codes. Still don't have them now. So,
So with the increase in schools that are doing these prohibitive dress codes,
yeah.
how many parents groups are trying to combat it?
So I had this nice, a decent number. So obviously parents of girls especially, but any kids who got, who get dress coded often do complain or are very unhappy. So my friend, she ultimately took her daughter out of school and homeschools her now. And she had a friend who has kept her daughter in there, but they're very unhappy. And tried to talk to, for example, the school principal, have gone to the school board and have gotten nothing. The school board was, and of course I tried to contact them and they were having none of it, these outsiders. So parents are often very upset about it, but unless they do something like really cause a big stink, go to school boards and make it, or persistent, not much gets done. Yeah.
I think the biggest issue, at least with school boards, is most people who are interested in being on school boards, the people who typically participate in these activities, are people who are probably of a different generation,
Yeah.
more than likely geriatrics at this point, at least. But so once I don't want to once.
But who's on school boards? Right, they're generally older folks. Yeah.
That's very true. In a town like Lewisburg, where there's 7 different churches,
Right.
Yeah.
2,000 people.
I mean, I actually have a friend who is a couple of years older than me, and was actually on his school board for a while. So I mean, but I mean, generally speaking, you're not going to find somebody who's
Yeah.
below the age of, I would
Probably at least 40.
45,
Yeah.
that's on a school board, and which kind of harks back to the an old style of thinking, mm-hmm. progressive thinking. So maybe instead of maybe. I'm trying to think.
Well, we need to have more diversity in school boards, right? And including younger folks.
Absolutely, I think a shine away from. I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. Well, regardless of it should get there in time. Regardless. Now, I'm not saying that in time is an acceptable answer. Of
Right.
course,
Yeah.
but
Well, there's a lot of things we're waiting for as old people die off and younger generations.
I didn't want to say die off.
Know what you're thinking. You know, I have a former student who's, I think he's around 26 now, and he's moved back to his whole hometown, and he's now running for school board. And so because I talk about this, all this, of course, he's hitting me up for money. I'm like, oh, I can't not give you some money for this. But, you know, he's 26, and he's running for school board. And I think that's great because I agree with you completely. There are very often generational differences. And so, but until we have some of those changes, it probably does help to go to school board meetings. Because if they don't know people are complaining, or if they think it's just a few whiners, for example, they're not going to do very much. Yeah.
So can I ask you something? Is it based on each school individually, or is it like Sheboygan Area School District, and so the superintendent of Sheboygan Area School District is in charge of creating those dress codes? Because I was thinking about this in terms of, I was going to
Let me just go back here.
I was going to talk to my daughter's principal about it. She's going to be in high school in 2 years, so it's a bigger issue. It's going to keep going on. You know what I'm saying? So I was thinking, well, should I contact the superintendent? What should I do?
They do tend to be, so Sheboygan has several schools, right? And so to some degree, they are district-wide, but schools do have some latitude. So you should contact both the principals as well as the school board. Yeah, and so the Sheboygan's high school. So Sheboygan South, there's chances are their dress code isn't much different, unless you're getting to some of the other, and so more private schools are going to have different ones. And so chances are they're relatively similar district-wide. It's unlikely that you're going to have, for example, one high school has a dress code and another doesn't within the same school district. So in that particular, in Kenosha, they did go to the school board because it seemed to be a district-wide policy. And the policies may be somewhat different for junior high or middle schools and high schools as well. So interestingly, some school districts may have them for middle school and not for high school. And actually seems to be more common to have them for middle schools, because apparently by the time you hit high school, you're not so easily distracted. No. So it doesn't hurt to contact both, and that's what these parents who are working with were trying to do, and they weren't getting anywhere either place. But they started at the principal's office, because the principal can also talk to teachers who are the ones who are generally enforcing this. And as somebody said, this is often dependent on whether teachers want to enforce it or not, and how they define the dress code for themselves. So a lot of this is an incredibly, not only the dress code subjective, there often may be certain teachers who really may think these are very important and give out a lot of, and look for dress code violations, whereas other teachers think that this is ridiculous and don't do anything because they're not concerned about this. So going to the principal first is probably good, because they are in control, you know, they're the boss of the teachers. So, other comments? Well, thanks for coming. Now y'all, you can go run for school board, right?